Welcome to my channel. Before I begin, imagine this for a moment. What if everything you believe about your life is wrong? What if the biggest enemy standing between you and success is not your family, your money, your luck, or your circumstances, but the voice inside your own head? Tonight, somewhere in the world, two people will go to sleep with the same dream. One of them will wake up and change his life forever, while the other will stay exactly where he is. The difference will not be talent. It will not be intelligence. It will be one single thought. And by the end of this story, you may never look at your own mind the same way again. So take a deep breath, open your heart, and listen carefully, because this journey might change the way you think forever. Ethan was an ordinary young man living in a crowded city filled with noise, pressure, and endless competition. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise, rushed to work, and returned home exhausted, carrying dreams that seemed to grow further away each day. He wanted success, happiness, confidence, and freedom. But no matter how hard he worked, his life never changed. Deep inside, a quiet voice constantly whispered, "You are not good enough. You are too late. You will never succeed." Ethan never questioned those words. He simply believed them. That was the first turning point of his life, although he did not realize it yet. One rainy evening, after another disappointing day, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, staring out the window as thousands of lights shined across the city. He opened social media and saw people celebrating victories, traveling the world, and achieving dreams. Instantly, he felt smaller. Why is everyone moving forward except me? He asked himself. That night, for the first time, he understood that his greatest battle was not against the world, but against his own thoughts. The next morning, something unexpected happened. On his way to work, Ethan noticed an old bookseller sitting quietly beside the road. Among hundreds of books, one title caught his attention: The Mind Creates the Future. Without knowing why, Ethan bought it. That simple decision became the second turning point. Inside the book, he found a sentence that shook him completely. Your life follows the direction of your strongest thoughts. Ethan read the sentence again and again. Could it really be true? Had his own thinking been shaping his reality all along? For the next few days, he began paying attention to his thoughts. He noticed how often he criticized himself, doubted himself, and expected failure before even trying. Every challenge became proof that he was weak. Every mistake became proof that he was incapable. Slowly, he realized that his mind was like a garden filled with weeds. That realization became the third turning point. One afternoon, Ethan decided to test a new idea. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," he whispered, "I can learn." Instead of saying, "I always fail," he said, "I am improving." The words felt strange, almost impossible, but he repeated them anyway. Days passed, and something surprising happened. His energy changed. He stood straighter. He smiled more. For the first time in years, hope returned to his heart. That became the fourth turning point. But life was not ready to reward him so easily. A few weeks later, Ethan lost an important opportunity at work. Old fears immediately returned. His mind screamed, "See? Nothing has changed." He sat alone in frustration, ready to give up, when he remembered something from the book. Thoughts become reality only when repeated consistently. Instead of surrendering, Ethan picked up a notebook and wrote one question at the top of the page. What if this failure is teaching me something? That question became the fifth turning point. For hours, he reflected on his mistakes. Instead of blaming the world, he searched for lessons. He discovered weaknesses he had ignored for years. He realized that failure was not punishment, it was feedback. That night, Ethan made a promise to himself. He would no longer allow negative thoughts to control his future. Every morning, he would train his mind like an athlete trains his body. Every evening, he would write 3 positive things about his day. Slowly, his entire perspective began to change. Weeks later, Ethan met a traveler in a small park near his apartment. The old man had kind eyes and a peaceful smile. Seeing Ethan lost in thought, He sat beside him and asked, "Tell me, young man, what do you think about all day?" Ethan laughed nervously and replied, "Mostly my problems." The traveler smiled and pointed toward the sky. "If you spend your life staring at storms, you will never notice the sunrise." Those words hit Ethan like lightning. That moment became the sixth turning point of his journey. As the sun disappeared behind the city, Ethan realized that for years he had focused only on fear, failure, and disappointment. He had ignored opportunities, gratitude, and growth. Walking home that night, he could not stop thinking about the old man's words. Little did he know that this meeting was only the beginning of a journey that would completely transform his mind, his beliefs, and his future forever. The next morning, Ethan returned to the park, hoping to meet the traveler again. To his surprise, the old man was sitting on the same bench, feeding birds as the sun slowly rose over the city. Ethan walked toward him and asked, "Yesterday, you said that focusing only on storms makes us miss the sunrise. But how can I stop thinking negatively when life keeps giving me problems?" The traveler smiled and stood up. "Come with me," he said. They walked through quiet streets until they reached a small hill overlooking the city. Cars moved below them, people rushed to work, and the world seemed busy and chaotic. The traveler pointed toward the streets and asked, "What do you see?" Ethan replied, "I see traffic, noise, stress, and people struggling." The old man nodded. Then he asked, "Look again." Ethan looked more carefully and noticed children laughing on their way to school, an old couple walking hand in hand, and a shopkeeper smiling as he opened his store. Suddenly, he realized that both beauty and difficulty existed at the same time. That realization became the seventh turning point of his journey. The traveler said, "Life gives everyone the same world, but people create different realities because they focus on different things." Ethan remained silent, thinking deeply about those words. For years, his mind had been trained to search for problems instead of possibilities. That afternoon, the traveler gave him a strange challenge. For the next 7 days, every time you complain, replace the complaint with gratitude. Ethan laughed. "That sounds impossible." The traveler smiled and replied, "That is exactly why you need to do it." The challenge became the eighth turning point. On the first day, Ethan failed many times. He complained about his job, his finances, and his lack of success. But each time, he forced himself to find something positive. When he complained about being tired, he reminded himself that he still had the strength to keep going. When he complained about his small apartment, he remembered that he still had a place to sleep. Slowly, his perspective began to change. One evening, after finishing work, Ethan opened his notebook and wrote down 10 things he was grateful for. As he wrote, tears filled his eyes. He realized that he had spent years focusing on everything he lacked while ignoring everything he already possessed. That moment became the ninth turning point. For the first time in a long time, he felt rich without having more money, successful without achieving his dreams, and peaceful without changing his circumstances. Days later, Ethan met the traveler again and shared his experience. The old man listened carefully and then asked, "Tell me, Ethan, who controls your mind?" Ethan immediately answered, "I do." The traveler shook his head. "If that were true, you would not spend so much time worrying about things you cannot control." Those words struck Ethan deeply. He realized that his thoughts had been controlling him for years. Fear decided his actions. Doubt controlled his choices. The opinions of others shaped his confidence. That understanding became the 10th turning point. The traveler picked up a small stone and threw it into a lake nearby. Waves spread across the water. "Can you stop those waves?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "No." "Exactly," the traveler replied. "You cannot stop every thought from entering your mind, but you can choose whether to follow it." That lesson stayed with Ethan throughout the week. Whenever fear appeared, he paused and asked himself, "Is this thought helping me or hurting me?" Whenever doubt appeared, he replaced it with action. Instead of imagining failure, he focused on improvement. One night, while walking home through the crowded streets, Ethan saw a young musician performing alone on a corner. Hundreds of people walked past without paying attention, but the musician continued playing with passion. Curious, Ethan asked him, "Why do you keep playing when nobody is listening?" The musician smiled and replied, "Because I am not playing for them. I am becoming the person I want to be." Those words became the 11th turning point of Ethan's life. Walking home under the stars, he understood something powerful. Success was not about applause, approval, or recognition. Real success was becoming stronger, wiser, and better than the person he had been yesterday. For the first time, Ethan stopped chasing other people's opinions and started building his own future, one thought at a time. The next morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise and sat beside his window, watching the city slowly come to life. Something inside him had changed during the past few weeks, but he still felt that an invisible wall existed between the person he was and the person he wanted to become. Later that day, he met the traveler once again in the park and asked, "I understand that thoughts are powerful, but why do I still feel trapped by fear?" The old man smiled and handed Ethan a small mirror. "Tell me what you see." Ethan looked into the mirror and replied, "I see myself." The traveler shook his head. "No, you see the version of yourself that your mind has created." Those words confused Ethan. The traveler continued, "For years you have repeated the same stories in your mind. You said you were weak, unlucky, and incapable. Eventually, you started believing those stories, but beliefs are not facts. They are simply thoughts repeated many times." That realization became the 12th turning point of Ethan's journey. For the first time, he understood that the limits in his life were not walls built by the world, but walls created by his own beliefs. The traveler then led Ethan to an old gym hidden behind the city streets. Inside, athletes trained with determination and discipline. Some lifted heavy weights, while others practiced for hours without stopping. The old man pointed toward them and asked, "Do you think they became strong in one day?" Ethan shook his head. "No, they became strong because they trained every day." The traveler smiled. "The mind works the same way. Confidence is not something you wait for. Confidence is something you build." That lesson became the 13th turning point. Ethan suddenly realized that he had spent years waiting to feel ready before taking action, but readiness never came. Courage was created through action, not through waiting. Inspired by that idea, Ethan decided to challenge himself. The next day, he volunteered to give a short presentation at work, even though public speaking terrified him. The night before, fear filled his mind. His thoughts whispered, "You will embarrass yourself. Everyone will laugh at you." For a moment, he almost gave up, but then he remembered everything the traveler had taught him. He took a deep breath and said to himself, "Fear is only a thought. I choose my actions." The next morning, Ethan stood in front of his coworkers with shaking hands and a racing heart. At first, his voice trembled, but after a few minutes, something unexpected happened. He relaxed. He smiled. He finished his presentation successfully. Nobody laughed. Nobody judged him. In fact, several people congratulated him afterward. Walking home that evening, Ethan felt stronger than ever before. That victory became the 14th turning point of his life. It was not because he had given a perfect presentation. It was because he had defeated a fear that had controlled him for years. Days passed, and Ethan continued changing his habits. He woke up earlier, exercised regularly, and filled his mind with books, positive ideas, and meaningful goals. He stopped comparing himself to others and started competing only with the person he had been yesterday. Slowly, his confidence grew. His thoughts became stronger. His actions became bolder. One evening, Ethan met the traveler for what he thought would be the last time. They sat together on a hill overlooking the city lights. After a long silence, Ethan asked, "What is the most important lesson you have tried to teach me?" The old man looked toward the stars and replied, "Your thoughts shape your direction, but your actions shape your destiny." Most people dream about changing their lives, but very few are willing to change themselves. Those words became the 15th turning point, the most powerful lesson of Ethan's entire journey. At that moment, he finally understood that success was not created by luck, talent, or perfect circumstances. It was created by small choices repeated every day. As the cold wind moved across the hill, Ethan realized that his greatest transformation had not happened in his job, his bank account, or his surroundings. It had happened inside his mind. And although he did not know what challenges awaited him in the future, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was no longer the prisoner of his own thoughts. He was becoming the master of his own life, and the final lesson of his journey was still waiting for him. Ethan sat alone on the hill long after the traveler had left. The city lights sparkled below him like thousands of stars, but for the first time in his life, he was not thinking about what he lacked. He was thinking about who he had become. Months earlier, he had believed that success belonged only to lucky people. He thought confidence came from money, happiness came from perfect circumstances, and peace came from a life without problems. But now, after everything he had learned, he understood a deeper truth. Real change begins in the mind long before it appears in the world. As he sat there in silence, he remembered every lesson, every mistake, every fear he had overcome. He remembered the day he discovered that his thoughts created his reality. He remembered learning that repetition shapes belief, that focus determines direction, and that action transforms dreams into results. Yet one question still remained in his heart. If thoughts could change a person's life, then why did so many people remain trapped in fear and doubt? The answer came to him slowly. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for someone to rescue them. They wait for motivation, opportunity, support, or luck. They believe that one day, something magical will happen, and suddenly, everything will change. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Nobody is coming to build your future for you. Nobody can think your thoughts, make your choices, or fight your battles. That realization became Ethan's final understanding. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise and walked through the city streets. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. The traffic was the same, the buildings were the same, the people rushing to work were the same. The world had not changed overnight. Ethan had changed. He stopped outside a coffee shop and watched people staring at their phones, worrying about opinions, comparing themselves to others, and carrying invisible burdens inside their minds. Suddenly, he understood something that most people never realize. The greatest prison in the world is not made of iron bars. It is made of fear, excuses, and limiting beliefs. And the key to freedom has always existed inside us. Determined to protect his new mindset, Ethan began changing his environment. He stopped spending hours consuming negative content. He spent less time with people who constantly complained and more time with people who inspired growth. He replaced meaningless distractions with books, learning, exercise, and meaningful conversations. At first, the changes felt small, but week after week, they transformed his identity. He became more disciplined, more confident, and more focused. He understood that environment silently shapes thinking, and thinking silently shapes destiny. One evening, Ethan opened the notebook that had started his transformation. On the first page, he had written, "Why is my life not changing?" Now, months later, he turned to the last page and wrote something completely different. "My life changed when my thinking changed." As he stared at those words, memories flooded his mind. He remembered the frightened person he used to be, the person who waited for permission to dream, who feared failure, and who believed he was not enough. That version of himself was gone. In its place stood someone stronger, not because life had become easier, but because he had become wiser. Ethan finally understood the greatest lesson of all. Thoughts alone are not enough. Positive words alone are not enough. Dreams alone are not enough. Thoughts must become beliefs. Beliefs must become actions. Actions must become habits. And habits must become character. That is how ordinary people create extraordinary lives. Years later, Ethan would tell others about the lessons that changed him. He would tell them that their thoughts are seeds, and their future is the garden. He would tell them that fear grows when we feed it, and confidence grows when we practice courage. He would remind them that failure is not the end of the road, but a lesson pointing us in a better direction. Most importantly, he would tell them that nobody else can become the master of their mind. That responsibility belongs to them alone. So now, stop for a moment and ask yourself an honest question. What thoughts have been controlling your life? Have they been building your future or destroying your confidence? Have they been pushing you forward or holding you back? Because the truth is simple. Your life tomorrow is being created by the thoughts you choose today. If you continue thinking the same way, you will continue living the same way. But the moment you change your thinking, your entire future begins to change. It will not happen overnight. It will happen one thought, one choice, and one action at a time. Never forget this. You do not become what you wish for. You become what you repeatedly think, believe, and do every single day. The power to change your life has always been inside you. Trust yourself, train your mind, protect your thoughts, take action even when you are afraid. And remember that the person who learns to control his mind eventually learns to control his future. Thank you for listening to this story. If these lessons touched your heart, carry them into your life because your next thought could become the beginning of an entirely new future.